welcome to module number 2, and the focus of this module this week is on online gaming. Now, your first reaction to that title might be, well, that's basically every game that we play today. And yes, you would be correct about that. But in this module, we're going to be looking at the history of going online from about the 1970s to the mid-1990s. And then our next module, module 3, then we'll pick up at that chronological point, because that is when games start going massive. Okay, so let's do a quick overview of our content for this week, and we're going to go a little bit acronym crazy. We have some very important acronyms to discuss this week, and that is Plato, MUD, BBS, ISP, WWW, and MOO. So we'll learn. You know about some of those already, certainly, but maybe a couple of others you'll learn for the first time. So we're going to start with Plato, which is not the Plato in the Creating Plato's Cave in our textbook, but this Plato is an acronym for Programmed Logic Automatic Teaching Operations. That's kind of a mouthful, and Plato is certainly an easier way to say it. But what this was the first educational computer network that was developed at the University of Illinois in the early 1960s. And what Plato did was it connected users in real time for educational purposes through time-sharing terminals. So this was the first online computer system. Now, of course, where there are computers, there will soon be games. And in 1973, John Daleski, who was a student at Iowa State University, created a multiplayer game called Empire. This was for a class project, and it enabled 30 people to play at the same time. 1 year later, Gary Wisenhunt and Ray Wood from Southern Illinois University followed in Daleski's steps and created one of the first, if not the first, computer-based RPG game called D&D. Now, the next important acronym for us to look at is MUD, and MUD the acronym is a multi-user dungeon. And it was Roy Trubishaw in 1978 who created the first MUD. He was a student at Essex University in England, and he developed an online and multiplayer game for the DEC PDP-10, which, if you remember from last week, that's what the engineers and computer scientists at MIT were using to create and play Space War. Now, he achieved this game called MUD, or Multi-User Dungeon 1, on this computer, and it would go on to spawn other imitators and duplicators in different types of RPG gaming. Now, our third important acronym this week is BBS, and BBS stands for Bulletin Board Systems. It was Ward Christensen and Randy Seuss, who were two computer hobbyists that launched the very first BBS, which they called the CBBS, or Computerized Bulletin Board System. And they did this in Chicago in February 1978. And each BBS was unique, and it simply reflected the interests of the owner of the BBS. And these were all localized computer clubs that set these up, because people accessed them by making a telephone call through their modem. And at that time, to call distant cities, you had to pay long distance charges. So you were pretty much just at the mercy of whatever BBSs were in your local calling code. Now, as the technology advanced, some of the BBS hosts developed more advanced systems, and some began to include simple text-based games. So the sysops, or the system operators, created what were known as door games because users accessed them through a so-called door from the main BBS interface, and it metaphorically stepped them from one room, the initial BBS, into another, which was the game itself. And there were a couple very popular door games, such as Trade Wars and also Legend of the Red Dragon, which were both very, very popular. Our fourth acronym is the ISP, or Internet Service Protocol, and people began moving away from BBS boards to ISPs, such as CompuServe, America Online, and Prodigy, and there were also hundreds of local ISPs that you could join. I remember the ISP I joined in the 1990s was called GWIS, or they called it GWIS, and that acronym was for Gateway to Internet Service. But all of these larger national ones like CompuServe, America Online, and Prodigy had very popular games for its users to play. Gemstone was a text-based MUD type game that became one of the longest running and most popular games on AOL. Mad Maze was also a very popular game on the Prodigy system. Now the next transition is from the ISP, which was kind of these closed systems where you could only interact with things that existed in America Online, or Prodigy for Prodigy, into the greatly decentralized WWW, or obviously you know what that stands for, World Wide Web. Now, the introduction of the World Wide Web came in 1991 with Tim Berners-Lee, who was a physicist at CERN, and this was a fundamental shift in what the online experience was. And you had the rise of different internet browsers at that point. Mosaic and Netscape were the first, and they also enabled the creation of the first browser-based games. Now, another way to access remote computers at this time, and still today, is something called Telnet. And this was a text-based interaction letting the user, who was the client, interact with the other computer as if you were actually logged onto it. And this was the server. And Telnet, it actually enabled me to experience my very first truly online society. This was called Lambda Mu in the early 1990s. And MU is our final acronym of the week, and it stands for MUD, Object Oriented. And the Lambda Mu was created by Pavel Curtis at Park Xerox, and he modeled it after his house, and so people could literally telnet into this text-based world. You started off in his coat closet and then walked around through his house and then into the gardens and the rest of his home. But what you could also do as a user was create your own spaces and link them to others. So these were permanent spaces before you had permanent housing in games like Ultima Online. And so it was far ahead of its time. It attracted a number of users, really only a couple hundred at a time, before the system started to lag and break down. But there were hundreds and hundreds of these different types of MUs during the 1990s. And there was a 1994 Wired article which asked the question, why playing MUDs and MUs is becoming the main addiction of the 1990s. Okay, so this is an overview of our major content points this week. This week you also have a discussion question entitled The Transformative Power of Online Gaming. And we have several different areas to consider for how online gaming has been transformative. And this includes community building, identity formation, economic impact, technological advancements, and social interaction. And you're gonna select in the discussion question which of these categories you believe that online gaming has made the greatest impact. Now, the other activity this week is going to be your contribution to your course project, your final course project. And this week it's going to be the annotated bibliography. And the annotated bibliography will have a minimum of 5 historical newspapers, along with 2 course readings and 2 sources of your own choice from our course library. And of course, you'll also use the central textbook, Creating Plato's Cave, in your bibliography as well. Now, there's an example of an annotated bibliography in the assignment description, but it includes the citation to the source as well as a brief, roughly 50-word description of how you plan to use the source in your paper. So that is my overview for this week. I hope that you will enjoy the story about how humans first went online.